Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're making soup dumplings and this is my one all-time favorite thing to ever eat in the world. So every soup dumpling needs to start with a soup. So in a large pot I've added in one small onion. I've just cut that in half and add that in, skin and all. Taking 3 cloves of garlic, giving this a nice little bash. Throwing that skin and all in as well. And then we have 1 pound of chicken wings and drumettes, skin on, bone in. We need the bone for the flavor and the skin for the fat, and that goes into the pot as well. Next in goes 2 bay leaves, 1 large sprig of thyme, 6 cups of water, a handful of peppercorns, and 2 teaspoons of kosher salt. We're going to bring this over the stove, bring it up to a boil, lower it to a simmer, and let this cook for 2 hours. You need to skim off any of the scum that rises to the top. I was discussing this recipe with my sister because when I first mentioned it, she said, well, it's not really accessible, which is true because traditional soup dumplings are made with pork skin and chicken backs, and not everyone has or wants those ingredients. So we figured out a better way. So now that our broth is ready, we need to separate the solid from the liquid, so I'm just straining this over a large bowl. Now, could you buy store-bought broth? 100%. I just like to make my own broth when I can. This way I can control the flavorings and salt that goes into my chicken broth. Once everything is strained out, you can discard the solids or save the chicken meat for your favorite little pet monster. But now that that's all strained out, we need to separate the broth from the fat. Now this is a fat separator that you can find at any home goods store or online. And what's going to happen is the broth is going to sink to the bottom, the fat's going to rise to the top. And the way this spout is built, it's only going to allow that broth to come out. So once you start noticing that fat layer getting close to the spout, just stop pouring. So for this recipe, we need a little under 1.5 cups. So I'm just measuring that out in my liquid measuring cup, and I'm going to store the rest of this broth for any time I want to make something with a beautiful homemade broth. And you can see there's not a lot of fat in this broth, but it's nice to get that out when you can. Now for the flavorings of this broth, we either need smoked ham or smoked bacon. It's completely up to you, whatever you have on hand. We're just going to chop this up into a nice small dice. We also need a 2-inch piece of ginger. Again, I'm leaving the skin on. We're just going to slice this as thinly as possible. Next up, we have 2 scallions. Just take the back of your knife and just start bashing this a little bit. We want to start releasing some of that flavor. Now in the same pot that we made our broth in, there's no need to dirty 2 pots. We're going to add our set aside broth, add in the scallions, ginger, and roughly 1/3 cup of ham. We're going to take this over to the stove, bring it up to a boil, and reduce this by half. Just keep an eye on it because it's going to reduce rather quickly. Once it's reduced down, we're going to strain this once again, and you should end up with about 2/3 of a cup of this broth. Now the soup in soup dumplings is actually an aspic or a jelly. So into that same pot, we're going to add our now reduced broth and sprinkle in 1.5 teaspoons of unflavored gelatin. Stir this around until it's dissolved. If you prefer agar-agar, only use 1/2 teaspoon. Bring that back over the stove, bring it up to a boil, and shut off the heat immediately. Now we're going to pour this into a shallow container, pop a lid on this, and let this sit in the fridge to set up overnight. Now it's the next morning. We now have a broth jelly or aspic. The reason I left those onion skins in is because there's tannins and it provides this beautiful golden color to our broth. But we need to cut this up into little cubes. So I'm just taking a butter knife, running my knife through to make thin strips, flipping my container around, and running my knife through again. Now we're going to transfer this over to a small bowl, and I'm going to put this back in the fridge to stay cold because I don't want these to start to dissolve and melt because they are very fragile. But look at that beautiful golden little cube of broth aspic. Now for our dumpling skins, this is a very simple recipe. This is a hot water dough. So we have 1 cup of all-purpose flour. And I'm going to pour in 3 tablespoons of boiling water. This is going to start cooking that flour, getting that raw taste out. We are going to steam these as well, of course, but this is going to start that whole gluten magic situation happening. Add in 3 more tablespoons of boiling water, so we're using 6 in total. And we're going to add in 1.5 teaspoons of vegetable oil. This is going to provide an elasticity and a chew to our dumpling skins. Just mix this around till everything's well incorporated. Once it's cool enough, get in there with your hands and start forming this into a beautiful, soft, pliable dough. We're going to punch this down, cover it with a tea towel, and let this rest for half an hour up to an hour. Now for the actual filling of our soup dumplings, I have a 1-inch piece of ginger. 2-inch piece of ginger, but I'm going to split it into 1-inch pieces because I'm going to use 1 inch for our dipping sauce. So we're going to take that 1 inch for our dipping sauce and julienne it into fine strips. And this, again, is a very simple dipping sauce. It's just strips of ginger with black vinegar. And black vinegar is a little bit more intense and caramelized than your regular rice wine vinegar. So just pop that in a bowl and pour your black vinegar over the top, and we're going to set that aside and let that ginger flavor infuse. Now for the filling itself, we have 1 scallion. We're just going to chop this up into nice thin discs. We're going to move that over to a large bowl. Then we're going to take that other inch piece of ginger and we're going to microplane this over our scallions. Now the microplane is going to not only grate this as finely as possible, it's also going to release some of that ginger juice, which you want. Don't forget to scrape the back of your microplane because that's where all the ginger likes to hide. Next in goes 3 tablespoons of shaoxing wine, 3/4 of a teaspoon of sugar, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, 3 teaspoons of soy sauce, and 1/2 teaspoon of sesame oil. We're going to mix this together until it's really well combined. And I almost forgot, we also need 1/8 of a teaspoon of ground black or white pepper, not black pepper. You can buy it in a container, it doesn't have to be freshly ground. Now for the pork itself, I have 1 pound of ground pork. I'm just adding this to a food processor because I want this to get a little airier. So we're going to let that run for a couple of, maybe 30 seconds, that's it. You're going to notice a texture change in your pork, and that's what you want. We're going to add the pork to the rest of the ingredients and start mixing this until everything is well incorporated. You want that flavor throughout your ground pork. Then we're going to pop this in the fridge and keep it cold while we form our dumplings. So now that our dough is ready, we're going to take it out, give it a couple little kneads. Then we're going to roll this out into a nice, long, even-ish rope. It doesn't have to be super symmetrical. Then using my handy bench scraper, we're going to go in and we're going to start cutting these into small pieces about the size of a gnocchi. These are really stretchy and elastic, so your dough pieces don't have to be that big. You're going to be surprised how long these roll out to be or how wide. So cover the ones that you're not using, but using 1 piece at a time. We're going to start rolling this out. We definitely want the center of our dumpling skins to be thicker than the edges. If you have too thin of a center, then because it's going to absorb in and it's going to get lost. So make sure to roll out the edges thinner than you would roll out the middle. The easiest way to do that is just to hold it by the center and just start rolling those edges out. Now I've placed all these on a parchment lined baking sheet. I would recommend flouring with rice flour so they don't stick. Now that our skins are ready, we can combine our aspic with our pork filling. So just dump that in and gently start folding this so it incorporates throughout your pork filling. You want to have soup in every dumpling. So give that a good mix until everything is really well distributed. Now, we've rolled out our dumpling skins to about 2.5 to 3 inches. So take 1 dumpling skin, fill it with about 1.5 teaspoons of filling, and we're going to start crimping the edges onto to itself. We want to seal these completely because we want that pork filling to steam and that soup aspic to melt. I think traditionally it's 12 to 20 crimps, but do whatever you can do because we are not cooking for a restaurant here or fine dining experience. We're cooking for our family and friends. So I'm just placing that on a parchment lined or cabbage lined steamer basket. And we're going to continue to form our dumplings. Now, I am not going to eat all of these dumplings today. So after you've formed your dumplings, the ones you're not planning on cooking, put them on a sheet tray in the freezer, freeze them completely. Then you can put them in a ziploc and you have soup dumplings whenever your heart desires. I did go back and make a second batch of dough because there was a lot of that pork filling left over and I didn't want this to go to waste. So once again, filling the center of our dumpling wrapper, crimping the edges until this is really well sealed, and placing it in our steamer basket about 1.5 inches apart. Now over boiling water, we're going to steam these for 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, look at these beautiful little pillows of goodness. So now let's give these a taste. There is a certain way to eat soup dumplings. You can't pop the whole thing in your mouth. You will burn everything, the roof of your mouth, your tongue, everything. So bite a little hole. Then you can pour out the soup into your spoon or you can suck it out, it's up to you. And in that little hole you've made, chip in a little bit of that ginger infused black vinegar. It makes a world of difference. The soup is salty and smoky and rich. The pork is light and airy and full of all of those flavors. You can taste the wine and the scallions and all of those aromatics that you put in. But there they are. Soup dumplings. I hope you guys try to make these. Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked this video, give it a like. If you loved it, subscribe and hit that notification bell because I put out new videos every Thursday. Thank you again, and until next time, happy cooking. Jeez.